We're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about an interesting topic. A lot of us are actually used to talking about deep tech in technology, but with Awais, we're going to go into a different area and different domain. Awais, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Awais. I'm the founder and CEO of Pixxel Space Technologies. We're a company that's building and launching a constellation of Earth observation satellites to space. So we build these satellites. These satellites have a camera on them. And once they go into orbit, they take images of the Earth. So we're looking at images of farms, oil and gas pipelines, forests, infrastructure, what's happening. And whenever a change happens or something is changing, we keep a track of that and provide inputs to build a health monitor for the planet. That's what we're doing. We've already put 3 satellites up in space, 6 more going up very shortly, and the plan is to have a total of about 30 satellites that will provide global coverage on a daily basis. That's about it.
Thank you, Awais. So now, jumping right in to what was the inspirations to venture into, space tech, especially space technology, rather than pursuing a more conventional path that most of us are actually used to?
Yeah, I think depends on a multitude of different factors. When I went into BITS Pilani, which is the university I got into, I went in with the idea that let's get a very cushy job at a multinational company and see what comes out of it, which is also what my dad said. So he runs a small pharmacy at the village where I grew up, and he was like, "Look, running your own business is a big deal. So you just get a nice cushy job at a big place where you can have a good work-life balance." Obviously, it didn't turn out that way because of a few reasons. One, I think there was that always that childhood love or obsession for space, right? Which could be different things for different people. For me personally, that was about being fascinated with what's up there. Reading about the astronauts, reading about the Voyager missions, the space shuttle, the ISRO launches, and so on. And so that never really left. But the thing that really led to starting a deep tech venture were the 2 very crucial experiences that BITS Pilani provided me. One, there was a student satellite team that was present at the university where the scientists at ISRO used to come in and teach how to design, build satellites. And I was like, I have to be a part of this team. And so basically that was my year 1 and year 2 of college. So more than going to classes, it was spending time outside there learning what goes into building a satellite, which wasn't taught at that level of classes there. I was a bit lucky because BITS Pilani is probably the only university in the country where you didn't really have an attendance policy. So I didn't really have to hit a 75-80% attendance. So could spend most time doing the satellite work. So that was the first experience. But then there was an even more crucial experience that I think gave the confidence that anyone can actually go ahead and build a deep tech venture. You don't really need decades of experience in it, which was being part of the Hyperloop India experience. Now, some of us hopefully have already heard of the word Hyperloop. It was brandished about in the media about a few years ago. It was supposed to be this futuristic mode of transportation where you have a vacuum tube and vehicles could travel at really fast speeds, basically a faster mode of high-speed travel, but also a little bit more personalized with Hyperloop pods. But it all started with Elon Musk, like most things, tweeting about it. There's a lot of traffic in LA. Let's try and build a Hyperloop. So SpaceX decided to create a competition. They said, here's a 1-mile long vacuum tube at our headquarters in LA. Here's an open challenge to teams around the world. Why don't you come and race a Hyperloop pod here? And I had walked into the room of one of my seniors at college who was scribbling something about the Hyperloop on the whiteboard, and we got to talking. And the idea basically was, okay, we might get a teeny tiny chance to meet Elon Musk. So let's just put in the application. Why not? But to our surprise, pleasantly, we ended up getting through that first stage. And then we took it a lot more seriously and kept getting through different stages. And finally, out of like 2,500 global applicants, we became one of the 20 finalist teams to actually be given the green light by SpaceX that we can build it. And now the challenge was, how do we do it? We had to go down to Bangalore, and in the span of 3 months, you had to put a Hyperloop pod together, something no one had built before, something there was no how to guide on. You couldn't just Google how to build a Hyperloop pod because no one had done that. And if I just looked back a year before when we had applied for this competition, like there was no way we would even have thought we would get there. And if we got there, how do we do it? But the fact that we just got started on that gave us the confidence to say, okay, let's build it. And we were able to. We took this Hyperloop pod all the way to Los Angeles. We were able to meet Elon Musk, present it to the rest of the SpaceX team. And so that was the crucial moment that showed me that, look, here are a bunch of 30 undergraduate students with no experience on working on any hardware, but we still managed to put something like this together, competing with other universities that were way more well-funded and so on. And it was while being at that SpaceX factory, looking at those rocket engines being built, that gave that appreciation that if this is a private company in the US that's actually doing this at a pace that was probably unfathomable before, there's no reason why you can't do that in India as well. And so I think a combination of all of those gave that confidence to say, let's go back, let's look at what's up there. There probably was a gap in Earth observations where it said we'll build our own satellites.
No, that's great. I mean, Hyperloop, Elon Musk, SpaceX, that's all we are familiar with. So really looking forward for you to really take up the next challenge. Now, as we look at the startup ecosystem, especially in India, what are some of the unique challenges did you face in the early stages as you were looking at building Pixxel?
Yeah, I think it was all three challenges on steroids. Raising funding, getting customers, and building the tech. And it's especially harder if you're building deep tech or hard tech, right? The thing that didn't help was that when we started the company, we were still final year undergraduate students. So a lot of people didn't take us seriously, whether it was customers or investors. It was easy to get into a room because building satellites is fascinating for everyone. But then converting that into actual money was the difficult part. So I think in the first year to 2 years, it took time and effort to build the credibility, to build the level of trust that would enable investors to come in and invest in us, that would enable customers to take a bet on us when we didn't even have the hardware built. In deep tech or hard tech companies such as ours, the first 3 years are spent, if you're lucky, on building the tech and then proving it out there. And then post that, you can actually start generating revenue out of it, which is a little bit different with regards to some other ventures where you can probably start at least generating revenue in the first few months. And so you need to find the right kinds of partners or investors who would sort of look at it and say, okay, if this works, it's worthwhile for it to work. But if it doesn't work, that's fine. It was still a worthwhile effort. So the returns still need to be made, and the returns are likely outsized here. We just need to find the right partners and keep on knocking on just one door after the other until you get something. So obviously, funding for such a venture at a young age, but especially because it was relating to hardware was the tough challenge. The second was getting customers. How do you actually sell to customers if you don't have your product built or your satellite built or launched? But then your investors won't invest in if you don't have it. Right? And so just again, going and finding those right partners and early customers that are willing to take a bet, which also gives you an initial sense of where the product market fit will be, was the second challenge. And third was just putting together a team to build something that is quite hard to build. Building hardware is tough in the first place, but then you try to build hardware that needs to go up to space and operate there and operate for many years and provide commercial services. That's a different level. So I think usually the same challenges that any startup faces, but I think different in terms of the timing and how creatively you need to go about things.
Yeah. And hopefully the timing was perfect in terms of if you thought about this idea like a decade ago, the landscape would probably be very different. Now, the other question out of curiosity is balancing the long-term vision of your deep tech innovation with the pressure for the short-term results, which is typically when you're looking for an investor, is like, what are you going to get me in the short term, while explaining to them the long-term vision? If you can share your insights there.
Yeah, I think there are a small percentage of those deep tech or hard tech companies that can generate venture returns in probably 5 years, 7 years, 10 years that generally VCs look at.
Exactly.
OpenAI being sort of one of them, but obviously the 3 or 4 years of effort put into it before this isn't seen generally in terms of the output that's coming. So there's definitely a percentage and a good percentage of them that you can generate venture size returns in the 7 or 10 years that is usually being looked at. But the one thing to realize in most cases is, especially with regards to deep tech or hard tech, you're generally looking at a 10 to 15 year time horizon to actually see outside success. Yeah. In most cases, 20 years or greater. And I'll just take a few examples. If you look at SpaceX, everyone talked about SpaceX just a few days ago. They launched the biggest rocket to ever launch, and actually caught it with mechanical chopsticks. And they started in 2002, right? It's been more than 20 years before they could get to this point where they could actually compete with space agencies and sort of exceed the tech development that was there. If you look at Tesla, it took a similar amount of time to sort of get there, 15 plus years to generate the return. If you look at Nvidia, one of the world's most valuable companies, they didn't really take off until a year or 2 years ago. And for most of their duration that they started, they were sort of struggling to get up there. So I think it's a function of most hard tech or deep tech companies that it will take the first 5 to 10 years to actually figure out where to do, what the niche is, what the focus should be. And then after that, it's an explosive growth. But that's why you need to find the right partners who are willing to say, look, we are okay to wait 15 years because at the end of 15 years, it's either bust or it's going to be like a really outsized return.
Yeah, and I'm sure standing in front of investors and giving them with the short-term pressure and the long-term vision, which spans in decades, I can imagine only how difficult that.
Yeah, but I think it becomes important also because when you're trying to attract employees that will work on hard problems and won't give up when the things go wrong or things go south, you need that long-term vision to sort of keep people going. There's this book called Re-Entry that came up by Eric Berger, which talks about how SpaceX sort of did it and lift off before that. Why do you think people kept going after 3 successive rocket failures and you have people still working 15 years, 20 years with Elon despite all those demands? Is because of that vision to make humanity multiplanetary. It's of that vision to make sure that we have rockets that are sending stuff up there. So when you set a vision like make humanity multiplanetary, or in the case of Pixxel, build a health monitor for planet Earth, or in the case of Tesla, make sure that the Earth is a more sustainable place. That vision not only helps you keep going in things when things go wrong, and they inevitably will, but also helps you keep your employees and just make sure you rally across those difficult problems that are there. So yeah, I think just that long-term vision is important, but it also needs to come with a sustainable way of going about it. You can't say the returns will only come 25 years down the line, so we're not going to figure out how do we survive in the next year or 2 or 3 years. So yeah, it's a delicate balancing act.
And especially cost of failures that you were referring to in the space type technologies. Now, tell us a little bit more about the landscape of funding for deep tech in India, right? I mean, you talked about your company, but I'm sure you understand the entire startup ecosystem. And how has that evolved since you started raising money for Pixxel?
Yeah, I think we started raising money in 2019, which is basically when we incorporated the company. We were quite lucky that things had started to turn around at that point in time. Obviously, it was the opening of the dam at that point in time. It wasn't where it is today, so things are definitely a lot better in 2024 today than they were in 2019. But 2019 was also significantly better than 2015 or sort of any year before that. Right. Because at least in 2019, you could point to a few successful companies that had come out globally and say, look, if they can do it, there's no reason why we can't do it. And there were a few funds that were willing to differentiate themselves at the early stage, at the pre-seed or the seed stage, to come in and say, look, the way we will differentiate ourselves is we will be a deep tech fund. If everyone else is focusing on software, we're going to focus on deep tech. And that number has just grown now, thankfully, right? I think in 2019, you had just started to get the ecosystem of funders that could come in at the pre-seed or seed stage, but you would struggle to raise Series A, B, or anything beyond that in 2019. Come 2023, 2024, you're at a point where you started seeing Series A's and some Series B's being led by Indian funds and the ecosystem here. Okay. But it's really tough to raise Series C and D still. So hopefully in the next 5 years, we get to a point where that happens. But in the absence of that, you do have these early backers which at least make sure that the startups can get beyond the valley of death, and then you go global to sort of raise money. And I think we've started to see a lot of money flow in there as well. So I think today, if you're starting a deep tech venture in India, raising your seed stage on the basis of your pedigree and your credentials, even with just an idea, is a very probable thing that you can likely do. And if you have managed to execute well, you've managed to build some product, you've managed to get some customers, raising a Series A and B is also quite possible. But beyond that, you would definitely have to go international and knock on those doors. But hopefully that's changing.
And I hope the fact that you raised money in 2019 was a good thing. A year later would have been a little bit challenging, I suppose.
It was. I think 2019, we just raised about $700,000 in pre-seed funding, most of it coming from alumni from our university. People were like, they were looking at kind of philanthropically, where they were like, if this money goes down the drain, that's fine. These kids are doing something worthwhile. But then in early 2020, we were just about closing a $3.5 million seed round. And in March, the term sheets got pulled because we all know why. March 2020, everything started to close, and there were lockdowns. And so we had to go out into the market completely in April of 2020 without having hardware that we could show in person to people. But I think that worked out well because it taught us to be sort of thick-skinned and just survive. But in the next 3 or 4 months after that, we were able to increase that 3.5 to 7.3. So we were also quite lucky in the sense that people were willing to see the value as long as we kept knocking on different doors. But there were definitely a lot of companies that didn't come out at that point in time as well. But I think COVID also helped in a way because a lot of capital was stored and sort of pent up, and people were looking at a way to deploy it in very creative ways. And then there was a little bit of contraction, obviously, the last year because of macroeconomic conditions, but there's also loosening up now. So I think as long as you're doing well and you can knock on enough doors globally, there's enough money to go around to build and raise.
No, that's good. You persevered through it, and good. COVID worked out well for you guys. Now, wanted to ask about beyond capital. What other forms of support are crucial for deep tech startups to success? Right? I mean, it's not just you get it funded and you build your product. What other areas that are important?
Yeah, I think one thing that gets generally forgotten is the level of government support that you actually need for a sector that's early, right? If you're looking at biotech, if you're looking at space tech, if you're looking at EVs, you do need grants coming in at early stages from the government. You do need the government to be your anchor customer in the early days when they can take the risk that no one else can. The reason why SpaceX was able to survive again, going back to the deep tech company probably of our times, is after the fourth, after 3 failed launches, they were able to successfully launch the fourth one, and just the next day, NASA called them up and said, here's a $1.2 billion contract to build a supply mission to the International Space Station, right? And without that being an anchor customer, without NASA coming in and say, look here, we will take the faith in you to actually build something in the next 5 years, they wouldn't have survived. Or the fact that there were a lot of these EV loans and subsidies that came in for Tesla. And you look at India now, right? Whether that is the regulatory support structure that is coming up with the setting up of InSpace, or the revenues that we are getting in India, it's predominantly from the government. So you do need regulatory support, policy support, financial support from the government being an anchor customer, and you do need that to build an ecosystem which can then sustain without the help of the government.
Yeah, it's good with the country on a growth path and the kind of work that you are doing in space. Wish you best of luck for future in growing this company and doing us proud. So thank you so much for coming here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.